This is the Alienware M16 R2, the cheaper alternative to the Alienware X16 R2. Welcome to Tom's Honest Tips we're talking about the Alienware M16 R2. I personally think the M16 R2 it's objectively cheaper and slightly better alternative to the X16 R2. We'll talk more about that later. Anyway, now we've talked about the Alienware X16 R2, the premium laptop with a premium price. It had an Ultra 9 185H, RTX 4080, and 32GB of non-upgradable RAM. That's cool and all, but now we're talking about the Alienware M16 R2. It has the same CPU, the Ultra 9 185H, and the RTX 4070 instead of the 4080. The Alienware M16 R2 goes for a more generic, simple laptop look, and I honestly prefer this kind of look, but to each their own, am I right? It also does away with the extra piece on the back with all the ports, because now most of the ports are on the side with a few more on the back. Let's talk about the display first and foremost. It has a maximum screen resolution of 2560 by 1600. It's also capable of a refresh rate of 240Hz, but instead of 100% DCI-P3 on the X16 R2, the M16 R2 only has a 100% sRGB color gamut. That's really fine for gaming, but not so much for content creation. The M16 R2 is well built overall, and compared to the X16 R2, the M16 R2 only has 2 fans, but it still handles heat decently. One big advantage this has against the X16 is that the heatsink faces the user. Well, I think it's a very big advantage to me, because if you want to clean out your laptop or if you want to repaste it, you won't have to take out the entire motherboard out just to get access to the important bits. Now, I've talked about the Ultra 9 185H, but if you want to catch up, it's a 45W base TDP CPU with 16 cores and 22 threads total. It's also capable of a maximum frequency of 5.1 GHz, which is pretty darn cool. As previously mentioned, this CPU gets very hot. The GPU is the RTX 4070 with only 8GB of VRAM. While it isn't as high as the 4080's 12GB, 8GB is still a pretty respectable number. Apart from that, the M16 R2 has 32GB of RAM and 8TB of storage. The X16 R2 didn't have upgradable RAM, but the M16, this laptop, does. Whether you have 16GB or 32GB of RAM installed currently, you can always upgrade later down the line. The M16 R2 has 2 DDR5 RAM slots, so if you eventually want to get 64GB of RAM for some reason, then it's an option for you. If you want, you could also upgrade the storage. Just like the X16 R2, the M16 R2 has 2 storage slots. Now, what about the ports? On the right, we have a micro SD card reader and 2 USB-A 3.2 ports. On the left, we have an Ethernet port, which was missing on the X16 R2, and a 3.5mm audio port. To the back, we have an HDMI 2.1 port and 2 USB-C ports, but no display port. Now, why would I prefer the M16 R2 over the X16 R2? It's just easier to use, in my opinion. Not only that, it's also much more portable, as it doesn't have the thing on the back sticking out like a sore thumb on the X16 R2. It's also got upgradable memory, which is important to me, and the heatsink faces me, so I wouldn't have to worry about taking the motherboard out when I have to clean it out or do some maintenance. Other than that, the M16 R2 just has a better value for its price, and it's also a simpler, more accessible design. Well, if you like the M16 R2, you can scan this QR code to check that out, or if you really prefer the X16 R2, You can watch our video on that, or you can also scan this QR code to check that out instead. Thanks for watching.